everybody, it's Monday, July 19th. That means it's time for another episode of Chatting with Agnes and Cecilia, Nonprofit Conversations. I'm one of your hosts, Cecilia Sepp. I'm the principal and founder of Road Tulips Nonprofit Consulting and Association Management Services. I'm here with my co-host and friend, Agnes. I'm going to throw it over to Agnes to introduce herself.
Thank you, Cecilia. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our global audience, wherever you're joining us from. My name is Agnes Amos Coleman. I'm an author and a consultant. Over to you, Cecilia.
Great. Thank you, Agnes. And today we are having a true chat with Agnes and Cecilia, as it's just us having a great conversation about a topic that has come up recently. And that's, how do you come into a new organization and handle the fact that you obviously had a predecessor in your position? The only way that you would not have a predecessor is if it's a brand new position that was created and you're the first one, or it's a brand new organization and you're maybe the first chief staff executive. So we all have to deal with that, the good, the bad, and the ugly, as Clint Eastwood says in the Western. So Agnes, what are your thoughts about that? So you come in and you've got a predecessor, you're in a new job, you're excited, but what is your first thought about that, dealing with your predecessor?
Well, first of all, let me just say, you're right with the introduction. Organizations, people come and go. It's just the nature of the business. And we have to all embrace that. And I think that my guiding principles, or my recommendation, is that our guiding principles in managing and dealing with this should be respect for all, regardless of who they are, regardless of the situation, because all of us are going to deal with transitioning at one point in our career or the other. But if we have this guiding principle of respect for all, we can begin to navigate the process, whether it's our predecessor or we're taking over from somebody or somebody's taking over from us. If that guiding principles is respect for all, I think we're on the right track, Cecilia.
Yeah, I agree, Agnes, because generally when I've come into a position, I have tried to just see the work and not comment on the person who had the job before. The problem is human beings being human beings. One of our favorite things to do is people watch. And our second favorite thing to do after that is to talk about the people we watch. So a lot of times you'll come into an organization and people will say very negative things about your predecessor, or they didn't like your predecessor, or they spend way too much time telling you what was wrong with your predecessor. My way of handling that is I wouldn't know, I'm just looking at the system, or if it's a person, because this actually happened to me in a job I had a few years ago, everybody told me how terrible a certain board member was. And the more I heard, the more skeptical I became, until I had the chance to talk directly to that board member. And I just asked them straight out, what's your side of the story? Because I've heard everybody else's opinion, but I haven't heard yours. And it turned out that my idea of what had actually happened, which was this person was put in a bad situation, a bad position, and became a scapegoat for something other people didn't like, was accurate. Because after I balanced both ends of the story, that's what I learned. So I don't know, what do you think about that, Agnes? I mean, I like to do investigation.
I think for me, my perspective will be just stay away from, stay away from even trying to investigate the side of the story, and focus that effort on the work, like you rightly say. We all have our personalities. Things are different for everybody. There's always a story behind the story. And so I tend to just walk away from not focusing on what the story is, but focusing on the shared goal. Why was I hired into this organization? What is it that we want to accomplish now? And not engaged in the people element. And actually, when you're in that situation where colleagues are saying, okay, this is what happened, this is how this person did, they didn't do a good job, refocus them in the conversation and say, okay, how do we move it forward now? And I think that way we save ourselves a lot of headache from trying to get into personality, because you just never know. Life is so small, life is short and life is small, and the world is small. We will meet each other again. I've worked with people for 25 years and I still connect with them. And if I have this baggage with me of who they are and who they're not, trying to build a relationship with an open mind becomes very, very difficult, Cecilia. So that's just my personal take on that.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a good one. I do try not to necessarily burn bridges, as people say, but there is also a time where you have to say, I'm choosing not to engage with that person any longer. And you don't necessarily go out and try to torpedo that person or hurt that person, but you just don't have to be involved with that person either. And I think
Yes.
that's a choice we have to make, because again, people are what make an organization. And so you come in and you're new, you really don't know anyone, you don't really know what happened before, you're looking forward, other people are looking backward. And I think the challenge is trying to get people to look forward, because, okay, I can't do anything about what happened before, but I can do something about what happens next. And one of the things that happened to me is I had a C-suite level position where my predecessor, who had chosen to leave because that
Mhm.
person retired, kept reaching out to me. And I kept just politely kind of deflecting and saying, oh, thank you. I will contact you if I have any questions. So, how do you think about handling that? It's like I tried to be polite and not say anything one way or the other. So what do you think about that? If they're reaching out to you, like you haven't even asked them a question.
Well, it depends on why they're reaching out. If they're reaching out because they have, they want your insight on a particular, area of scope of the work where you can share your expertise because you've already done the work. I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to share your best practices and insight and say, okay, this is how I handled it when I was there. But if they're reaching out to you to get a scoop on, the politics of things, I think that personally, I would not engage in that. I would just focus on, do you need my help where I share my best practices, or do you need my help, where I can help guide you in what I did to be successful in the role? So there are two different approaches. If it's to help guide them, I would definitely support them in that element. But if it's to help with the political dynamics of things, I will probably just stay away from it, because that wouldn't end very well. That's where that's where I would say the Chinese whispers starts. You begin to, conversations that you shouldn't have begin to start. So that's my
I
take.
think that's a
Yes.
great point. It does depend on why they're reaching out.
Yes, exactly.
Now,
Exactly.
in my case, this person kept reaching out over and over again, saying, well, if
Yes.
you have any questions, you can just ask me. And I kept saying, okay, thank you, I will.
Yeah.
But you also have to take cues from the other people around you. Like if you're in a situation where like maybe the people you report to don't want you to talk to that person, and that's another thing that you have to.
And if they don't, Cecilia, I think that's fair. And this is where I would say that focus on building relationship with the new team that you're at, in the new organization. Focus on building relationship, know who they are, engage them, let them see you as their peer, that you're on board, you want to do great work. And if there's an opportunity, that cue is, okay, we want you to reach out to the predecessor, then that's fine. You can do that, and you do that very gracefully. You appreciate the value that they've brought, because don't forget that no matter how bad they are, they've definitely added value to the organization. So you want to focus on the value that they've added to the organization and explore that and appreciate them for that. And that's how you can build relationship with them as well.
Yes, and because I think a lot of times a predecessor is an excellent source of information.
Absolutely.
If the situation allows for you to reach out to that person. But I think probably in the best case scenario is when somebody is leaving, perhaps they're retiring, and they actually onboard you. And I think that's really very nice segue for most people, especially if you're in a chief staff executive position. The person's on their way out by choice, they're going to retire, whatever it is they're doing, and they can onboard you for 2 or 3 months. And then the issue with being onboarded by your predecessor is how long do you want your predecessor to be around? Because and that's another thing, like how much support do you think you need? Do you think it's going to affect your relationship with other people? Are they going to look at that person still as in that role? And so there's some of that too. But that I think is a good problem to have, because that means that person has a good reputation. They're still seen very positively. Sometimes your predecessor has a negative reputation after they leave for whatever reason, and that's very difficult, because you don't want to get dragged into that. Like like you
Mhm.
mentioned, Agnes, you want to get dragged into that. It's very difficult to kind of walk that line and get people to let go of the past, let go of that baggage. Let's move forward.
Mhm.
Let's look to the future because you can't undo what that person did necessarily. And whatever feelings were hurt, whatever comments were made, whatever way they
Yes.
managed things, you can always change the way things are done, but you can't
Mhm.
change what already happened. And I think that's really a challenge with our predecessors. And we should never say anything bad about our predecessors. We should
Totally
say,
agree.
even if they did a bad job, like I've had jobs where I've just said, well, why did that person do it this way? uh, that's the best question to ask if you're coming in behind someone, to say, well, why did they do it this way? Because they most
Mhm.
likely had a good reason at the time.
Absolutely. No, I really, I think a lot of what you said makes a lot of sense. And whether we like it or not, this is a topic that impacts us as the associate, as an association community. We deal with this, with the hiring, recruiting, firing. This is a very common issue. And I think that having this segment definitely should help guide some of those thinking and discussion and talking about it. Maybe it's not even a bad idea to talk about it as an organization, best practices. How do we deal with this? How do we handle this? But the bottom line, as I said when we started this conversation, Cecilia, is that our guiding principle should be respect for all. If we follow that guiding principles, I think we will do well, because we then take a much more intentional approach towards the process. In that way, everybody wins, and we take away, that negative element from it and make it a much more positive experience for all.
Yeah, I agree so much because people don't respect how much effort a person put into a job necessarily. If that person leaves under a cloud, as we like to say in the States, meaning they left maybe in a bad relationship situation,
Mhm.
or people didn't like what they were doing or how they were doing it. But
Mhm.
I really found the respect what you don't know is
Mhm.
another thing, because you don't know why that person did what they did or how they did it. So find out,
Mhm.
just ask some questions, inquire as to, well, why did the person do it this way? One of my favorite examples is I had a job years ago where I was a department director and I was doing my first budget, and there was a
Uh-huh.
cookie line in the budget just for cookies. And I'm just, cookies? They also have a meals budget. So I went to meet with some senior staff who were helping me,
Mhm.
learn my job. And I say there's a cookie line in the budget. Could somebody explain that to me? And they did. And it turned out, like, I didn't say this is stupid. I was like, okay, there's always a reason behind something,
Mhm.
whether it's a budget line item or a paragraph in a contract,
Mhm.
because something happened that made that language appear. And so they explained to me that this volunteer group that I was working with had wanted cookies at a meeting one time and they were told no.
Mhm.
And so they lobbied for a cookie budget because they just wanted cookies to have with their coffee. And I was like, okay. I'm like, well, that makes sense. I said, but now
Yes.
that there's a meal line item, would it be okay to just put the cookie money in the meal? Because I'm going to order the cookies with the meal, right?
Yes.
So, that's one of my favorite examples, because it was just,
Mhm.
there was a story, there's a
Yes.
story behind everything.
And
Yeah,
there is, you're right. And
yeah.
that's why when we transition into organizations, it's always nice to get that, cultural and historic insight into things. Why are things done? That should be part of our onboarding questions, share with me, what is your perspective on this? Why is this done? Why is this not done? That way we prepare ourselves. We're armed with a lot of information to allow us to make the right, make the right business decisions.
I agree. That's great advice. Don't make assumptions
Yes.
moving forward. So, well, we're at the end of our episode already. This is a great topic. We hope we gave you some ideas to think about and some advice that you can maybe build on in your own career in dealing with
Mhm.
people, as it seems like such a crazy job market, as Agnes was mentioning before we started today. There's a crazy job market out there. People are job hopping. So as you're hopping from job to job or segueing into maybe a more senior position, remember to ask, don't assume.
Mhm.
Uh, because we all
Even for organizations who are setting, leadership who are setting best practices within their organization, I think that they should consider talking about these issues. How do we deal with this? How do we deal with transition in talking about our predecessors? I think these are, coffee talks that we can have around the table. And I think that there's great value within our association community to have these conversations.
Yeah, great. And that is a great thought to close on. Thank you, Agnes.
Thank you,
So we
Cecilia.
have to go rogue for now, but we'll be back next week with another exciting episode. So tune in. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube playlist and you'll never miss a beat. You can also subscribe to our audio podcast version on many different podcast services. So find your favorite podcast and look us up. If you want to know more about Rogue Tulips, you can check us out at roguetulips.com. We'd love to hear from you. Also, if you're interested in continuing education, specifically for the Certified Association Executive Program, check out our sister company, the 501c League. You can find out more about the league at 501cleague.net. That's all for now. We'll see you next time.
Bye.